In a world of clicks, likes, and follows, there are two things that seem to feast upon those of us who seek validation from others: ego and status. Both are peculiar, ego being our perceived value and status being our placement therein. Both are an illusion, a mirage that harkens us forward, past our true selves, our actuality, our reality, leading us to something often disguised as happiness. Perhaps it cannot be described. Perhaps it is simply a feeling, ineffable yet satisfying, or perhaps it ain't even that deep. In today's episode, we will delve into the ego of one Theophilus Turner and the lengths he went through to preserve his own status. This isn't a morality tale, some story which ends in a definitive right or wrong. In fact, this is a simple retelling, a modernization of a story written long before me by the great Lebanese author Khalil Gibran that simply questions the idea of status and admiration and the man-made trap that ensnares us all. But perhaps you can decide. Welcome to the Stories We Tell Ourselves podcast, Season 2, Episode 5. Thank you for joining us. As I stated earlier, this episode is about the idea of status and ego, and how sometimes through no fault of our own, well, let me not say that, through some fault of our own, it can actually control us in our decision-making process. And this story is simply about that. I would like to say that this is going to be one of the shorter episodes. There will be no biographical A section. We're going to go straight to short story. So for those of you that were anticipating that will be next week. Now, as always, we're going to push past the preamble and jump into a short story that I like to call Son of the Morning. To begin, the Reverend Theophilus Turner was known throughout the Midwest as a man of the people, not only in his demeanor and daily activities, but over the course of a 30-year career as a pastor and evangelist, he never lost the common touch. His sermons were short, to the point, and spoken with a level of simplicity that even the youngest of congregants could understand. This, of course, brought fame and a considerable fortune which Theophilus never flaunted and rarely mentioned. His wife and children lived in a modest home, drove modest cars, and as far as anyone could recall, financial matters were seen as a distraction, an obstacle which the Turner family avoided in polite conversation. Theophilus would rather spread faith and steadfastness, the virtues of patience and seed sowing. He also was a staunch advocate of wisdom and the idea that in this world, protection was key. When away from the podium, Theophilus was known to carry a silver Colt Cobra .357 revolver on his person, or in the glove box of his 5-year-old sedan. This wasn't meant to frighten or project the idea that he saw himself as a hero or a rebel of some kind. It was simply because twice, while evangelizing in the early 80s, he was robbed at gunpoint. The second robbery left him bruised and bloodied on the side of the road in a small Kentucky town. Hours later, when he awoke in the hospital, wallet and watchless, he vowed to never be a victim again. Unlike most churches in town, the First Evangelical Vision House of Worship had a building fund which had been fulfilled. Raising over $5 million over the course of 7 years, construction had begun on an even larger facility, able to seat up to 5,000 parishioners with comfort. The campus would contain space for a sanctuary, a daycare, a student center, and even a large gym, which would not only be used for the obvious, but there would also be self-defense classes taught by one of the deacons, experienced in the martial arts. After a groundbreaking ceremony, which was reported on throughout the Midwest, Theophilus began to receive several invitations to speak at some of the more prominent churches in several states and cities unfamiliar to him. Due to obligations, most of these requests were courteously declined, but upon receiving a phone call from a small church located in East St. Louis, who only wanted him to do a private, in-person consultation on the proper way to conduct fundraising, Theophilus accepted under one condition. There would be no honorarium. His services would be for free, as a show of brotherhood and his way of increasing the kingdom of God. The reality was, Theophilus needed a break from the constant barrage of questions from contractors and discussions of building plans and the constant sound of construction, which was starting to become unbearable, but a required nuisance. The church did offer to pay for his flight, but Theophilus, eager to have as much time alone as possible, declined, stating that he would make the 7-hour drive himself, and even refused their offer of gas money. The engagement was agreed upon, and the next evening, Theophilus embarked on a journey to East St. Louis, free from the pressures of leadership and responsibility, if only for a few hours. The crisp night air was a well-needed escape. Along the way, Theophilus entertained himself by listening to classic gospel music and gazing at the night sky. It was free from the light pollution of the city, filled with stars and wonders, allowing him the ability to do what he hadn't done in years: relax. For 30 years, his life was spent casting out demons and praying for the sick. He visited the elderly and feeble, spread oil on countless foreheads, and conducted so many funerals that his own life became a blur. In his youth, Theophilus had plans of being an Olympic sprinter. He had broken several state records, and if it had not been for injury, he'd always wondered what his life would have become. This wasn't necessarily a thought of regret, but a simple pondering of what could have been. He was thankful that his church had grown from a small meeting of 3 or 4 friends in his college dorm room to what would soon be a megachurch, able to reach millions, and as a result, increase his already substantial financial situation several times over. Not to mention his faithful wife and well-adjusted children. It was while contemplating his past that the front left tire of his Cadillac ran over a shattered bottle in the middle of a country road, causing it to go flat. Annoyed but patient, Theophilus promptly pulled over, inspected the tire, and opened his trunk to retrieve the tools needed for repair, along with the spare. The road was eerily quiet. No traffic in either direction. On both sides of him, cornfields stretched out as far as his eyes would allow, and the rhythmic sound of crickets and insects, although peaceful, was a reminder to hurry. He was alone, after all, 51 years of age, and as far as he could tell, ripe for the picking. Taking all 3 of these factors into account, he quickly jacked his vehicle, replaced the tire, and shuffled to the back of his car to set the items in their proper place before continuing on. As he closed his trunk and headed toward the driver's side seat, a faint murmur was heard coming from the cornfield across the road to his right. His first instinct was to ignore it. It was likely some small mammal burrowing into the ground or even his imagination, but suddenly the murmur became a plea. "Help me." Still faint but unmistakable, repeated intermittently in between the night calls of hidden creatures and vermin. After much trepidation, Theopolis reached into his vehicle, opened his glove box, and retrieved his revolver, which he promptly nestled within his waistband before crossing the street into the darkened rows of corn. After entering the field, the pleas for help grew louder, and with each step, closer. Following the sound, Theopolis walked through the many rows of stalks until before him, shivering and bloodied, lied a mound of large black wings, which enveloped what seemed to be a man gasping for air. Moving closer, Theopolis saw that the wings were indeed attached to the shoulder blades of a man, and with each heave of his back in an attempt to breathe, the wings tried and failed to expand. Frightened, Theopolis retrieved his revolver from his waistband and demanded that the man roll over and show himself. Several failed attempts later, the man turned himself over and faced Theopolis. Although covered in blood, his visage was quite beautiful. His eyes were like mirrors, and physically, he was muscular and large, with skin that appeared to almost be copper under the moonlight. "Who are you?" said Theopolis, attempting to hide his fear. Gasping, the creature spoke, saying, "I believe that you are well aware of who I am. Truth be told, I have known you for years." Pointing his gun at the man, Theopolis spoke again, this time with more authority. "You got one more time of me asking before I put a bullet between them eyes of yours. Who are you?" The creature chuckled, moved himself closer to Theopolis, and said, "I have many names. Belial, Azazel, Jinn, Beelzebub." Before he could continue, Theopolis interrupted, saying, "Satan?" "If you must," replied the man, "yes, Satan is the more universal of them all." "And now," replied Theopolis, "how did you end up here, like this?" "It was Michael, the archangel. In the heavenly realm, there was a mighty conflict. Our swords crossed, and he got the better of me. Overcome from my wounds, I seemed to have lost consciousness and fell from that place. When I opened my eyes, I found myself here, in your world, bleeding into the soil like a wounded animal." "Then I will let you die," said Theopolis. "Looks to me like you had it coming. God is good." Satan began to cough violently, spewing forth blood and bile uncontrollably. Disgusted, Theopolis pointed his revolver at the fallen angel, saying, "Or perhaps I can end your misery. I can show you that mercy, if you'd like." Pulling himself upward enough to sit somewhat comfortably, Satan gave one final plea. "If you will allow me, may I tell you a story? Something to remember me by before you take my life." Seeing that there was no real danger at hand, Theopolis lowered his gun and said, "Go on, but make it fast. I have the Lord's work to do, and I am a bit behind schedule dealing with you." "Understood," replied Satan. "Thank you for your mercy." With that, Satan inhaled as hard as he could, so much so that his large black wings stretched out before them and slowly retracted behind. The sight alone sent a tremor through Theopolis, which was noticeable, but, ignoring the fact, Satan proceeded. Long ago, when men dwelled in caves and fought against the elements and their fellow men, there was a small village of kind and ignorant people, blind to all things scientific and natural. They had no understanding of weather or the stars. They believed thunderstorms and earthquakes were warnings from the gods and lived their lives in fear of their admonishment. When a child died, they blamed their past. When a flood ravaged their village, sweeping away their possessions into the sea, they believed this to not only be their fault, but something which they deserved. To them, whether known or not, the gods allowed these things because somewhere within the village, Someone had committed a sin which caused consequence, a consequence which they gave sacrifice and lamentation as a sign of guilt and the beseechment of forgiveness. It was around that time that a stranger wandered into the village who went by the name of Dominguez. He was a traveler who had roamed the earth for many years, moving to and fro from adventure to adventure with no home to call his own. When he arrived at the village, he was in a horrible state. His beard was long and filthy, reaching to the center of his chest. His cheeks and eyes were sunken deep into his skull, and he smelled of every manner of grime imaginable. Being that the people of the village were kind and unlearned in the ways of men, they immediately came to his aid. They fed him and provided shelter, gave him clothing to wear, and even looked after him as he slowly gained his strength. It was around this time that a great plague fell upon the village. Many of the strong among them died, and no matter what amount of sacrifice and pleading they offered the gods, the deaths still increased. The people were in disarray, fearing that judgment had fallen upon them and their village would soon be no more. Dominguez, being a naturally curious man, took time to visit the sick and observe the daily activities of the village. At first, he could find no fault on their part. These were a simple people, stricken by some apparent bad stroke of luck, he supposed. One day, while watching a servant girl prepare a meal for her sick father, Dominguez noticed that the little girl handled the bloody meat carelessly. She transferred the meat from beast to fire, from fire to hand, and continued this way without thought. He found this to be irresponsible, but he assumed this was some anomaly, and surely the people practiced cleanliness out of pure habit, if not shame. Still curious, he began to take notice of how the people lived their daily lives, touching their faces with soiled hands, sneezing upon one another, coughing without covering. In his travels, he had seen this before, while dwelling amongst the Sumerians in the Middle East. The only difference was they used a creation made of boiled animal fat and wood ash, which they would let harden, douse in alkaline salt, and create what they called soap. Once water was added, one could wash themselves and remove any dangerous element from the skin, preventing it from transferring to one another. It occurred to Dominguez that these people had no idea of the concoction, let alone how to produce it. Days later, as they buried the dead, Dominguez pretended to convulse and pass out within eyesight of the villagers. Once they came to his rescue, he revealed to them that he had had a vision from the gods, a vision that could cure the sick and prevent this plague from emptying the land of their people. Not knowing what he spoke of, the people promised Dominguez that if this vision was true, and if he were able to somehow put a stop to this calamity, they would forever be in his debt. At once, Dominguez gathered the ingredients needed and prepared a large cauldron before the people, which boiled well into the night. By morning, the contents had been dried and salted and readied for use. When all the villagers had awakened, Dominguez stood before them holding a large portion of the creation in his hand, with a large container of water waiting at his feet. As the people watched, Dominguez shouted, "Behold, the gods have entrusted me with a cure for the sick, a cleanser which will rid you of the transmission of sickness and heal your village once and for all." With that, he dipped the soap into the water and rubbed it furiously with his hands until a white foam emerged. The people gasped in amazement as he asked for one of the little boys, who was covered in soot, to approach him. Once the child was within arm's reach, Dominguez lathered the boy's face and arms with the concoction as the people giggled and scoffed in doubt. Once the boy was fully covered in bubbles, Dominguez took the container and tossed the water onto the boy. As the water ran down his face and body, the boy's skin brightened before them. Even some of the dirt from his clothing had disappeared. Entertained more than educated, the people cheered and rubbed the boy with laughter. But it became apparent to Dominguez that they still held no real understanding of what they had seen. Slightly irritated, Dominguez shouted, "The gods have instructed me that before the preparation of meals and even before touching the sick, you should use this on your hands. This will remove the demons from your body and allow you to remain in good health for as many years as you are graced with. Also, this should be applied to the sick as well. This is in order to remove the demons from them." There was silence. The people wrestled with the idea of this being some trick or some new plague which would push the community further into the hands of death. But in the days that came and the months thereafter, as long as they followed Dominguez's instructions, the plague began to depart from the village. So much so that within a few months, health and wellness had returned. When it was time for Dominguez to continue his travels and bid the villagers goodbye, the elders approached him with a proposition. They believed that he and he alone had the ears of the gods, and with that power, he would be able to shield them from any manner of tragedy that would ever befall them. They wanted him to stay, and if he accepted their offer, they would hold him the highest esteem and seek his counsel on all things concerning the village, spiritual or otherwise. In truth, Dominguez intended to share the recipe for the soap and be on his way, but once he realized the level of gullibility within the tribe, coupled with the offer of status amongst them, he accepted the offer. In the years to come, he took several wives, land, and a considerable amount of gold and silver. When he had sons, he shared the recipe along with other medicinal secrets with each one of them, swearing them to secrecy until the day of his death. From then on, armed with these secrets, his sons and their sons after ruled over the people. The people even gave them a title, counselor. Over several millennia, the title changed. The counselor became chief. The chief became priest. Priest became pastor. And the people were never the wiser. Once Satan had finished his tale, he spewed forth another mound of blood onto the ground and smiled at Theophilus, who now seemed to be in a state of confusion. "Do you understand the meaning of the story?" said Satan, while wiping the blood from his mouth. "I understand that you are the father of lies," replied Theophilus, "and as I planned to do before you opened your mouth, I intend to kill you." As Theophilus lifted his revolver, Satan spoke again, saying, "All that you are is because of me. Can't you see that? If you kill me, or even leave me here to die, what will you do with your life? Your very position is dependent on my existence. How did you obtain your cars, your house, your church? Better yet, why did you obtain them? It was because of me. Whom will you fight against? For what reason will you be called in the wee hours of the night to pray over the fearful and faithless? Answer me if you can." Theophilus considered his words further as Satan continued, "I understand that we are sworn enemies. This is how it has always been, but within our confrontation, there has always been a silent understanding that we rely upon one another. It is my job to lurk among the shadows, just as it is your job to be a lantern which lights a path forward. If you rid the world of that, of me, you will be ridding the world of need. Answer me if you understand." Taken aback, Theophilus stared at Satan, watching him gasp and cling to the last moments of his life. He had no idea if this was another trick, or if this was a sincere call for a truce, but what he did know was that he had a decision to make. a decision that would not only affect him and his way of life, but also the entire world. Moments later, as the sun began to rise amid the cornfields, the Reverend Theophilus Turner found himself carrying the creature across the road on his back, placing him into his Cadillac and driving him to the nearest hospital, praying for the life of Satan. Thank you for joining us for the 5th episode of the 2nd season. I hope within this episode, some of you found it thought-provoking, if not entertaining. I would say if you would like to read the original story, which is fairly different from this one, you can find the story by Khalil Gibran. It's entitled Satan. It's a fantastic story. I hope that you will all take the time to actually seek it and read it for yourselves. It's quite phenomenal. Having said that, I want to thank you again for giving me your time. This is actually going to be a pretty short one. I hope it's just something that can kind of stick with your head as you kind of go through traffic, or if you want to waste a little bit of time. Personally, I'm in the midst of several different obligations. So, although I do attempt to do this as often as possible, I do have to take breaks here and there to kind of get my obligations handled. But having said that, by all means, please share the podcast with your friends, families, and enemies. It would be greatly appreciated. And as always, you can always reach me via email at swtomail@gmail.com. That is swtomail@gmail.com. I want you all to stay safe and stay positive. And by all means, as always, be mindful of the stories you tell yourself. Goodbye.